What's up, everyone? This is Sam Jesse, and I'm here with the crew from the Locks of Saturday, Brett, Ed, and Dom. Welcome back. We're continuing our preview series tonight with the Big Ten. Big Ten is a really interesting conference this year, and obviously, this will be the last year that we have the current roster of the Big Ten. They will be adding 4 new teams from out west: USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington. So this conference has been the maybe the number one news point in college football this offseason. But this year, there are some interesting questions with some of the old heads in the Big Ten. Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State are continuing to be the kings of this conference in the Big Ten East. And the Big Ten West is, I think, really similar to the SEC West, where, I mean, 3 or 4 teams could win it. You don't really know who's going to finish where, except for maybe Northwestern, but we'll get to them in a bit. They've had quite the offseason as well. So it's a lot of really fun stuff. Let's go ahead and get right into it. Excuse me, I need some water already. Not a good sign. Brett, let's let the people know where they can bet on these games. Now, you can bet traditional game line money. You can do some player prop stuff, but not a lot in college. Where can the people go for player props in college football?
That would be the wonderful Prize Picks, Sam. Prize Picks is awesome. I've kind of talked about it, hit on low every week. Player props are almost just as fun, if not as just picking games, especially college athletes with crazy stats. You don't know what's going to happen. So, picking, we've talked about before, yards, touchdowns, even catches. There's pretty much anything you want to do with a college game. We talk about every week. There's some game, that we want. There's a team like the Big 12. We always talked about, yards, total offensive yards. Big 10, Penn State. Anytime there's a over on rushing yards for a player, pretty much hammer because they're going to be running the ball a ton this year.
There's a lot of good running backs in this conference, including at Michigan, where they have 2 of the best running backs in the country, headlined by Heisman Blake Corum. So a lot of good running backs. Travion Henderson for Ohio State is certainly a guy who could also be in the Heisman conversation. Back from injury, yes. So we'll talk about the Buckeyes. We'll talk about the Wolverines. But let's start ahead right now with what we think could be our game of the year. Now, this isn't maybe the most anticipated game, maybe not between the 2 highest ranked teams, but this is the game that could determine the most in terms of win-loss total, who wins the division, or maybe just a really important game for the future of the conference. Dom, we'll start with you. What is your game of the year in the Big Ten?
Well, my game of the year is pretty vanilla. I'm sure you can guess it. The game, obviously. November 25th, Ohio State at Michigan. Michigan's 2.5-point favorite in this game. I feel like this game is always ultra competitive with not only Big Ten, but also college football playoff implications at stake. It seems like every year in the past couple of years. I think we get another dogfight. The game's a little later in the season, so we'll likely have 2 teams with very few losses looking to bolster their resume, looking forward to the playoffs. So it'll be a lot of tension, a lot of bad blood. It seems to happen every year these teams play. Dogfight, bad blood should make for a good game of the year.
Who do you have in that one right now?
I got Michigan. I like Michigan in those close games, dogfights. Michigan's just prepared for that. They've got really good offensive line. I like J.J. McCarthy in this close game, so I like them to win that.
Nice. Ed, you going with the game as well?
No, I figured that Mo would, so I wanted to talk about a different game, and I'm going to go with Michigan at Penn State. I think Penn State's got a really, really good roster, and while Sean Clifford was always an okay quarterback, above average, I think Drew Allar gives them potential to have that next type level quarterback. So if that's a Week 11 game, so if Penn State's still in the mix and hasn't hit any hiccups by then, I like Penn State. I like Penn State a lot, and I think that the Michigan at Penn State game could have a lot of huge implications.
I'd agree with that one. And there's a lot of hype around Drew Allar. I think it's almost similar to what we saw with Trevor Lawrence when he was at Clemson. People think he's going to come in and be the guy for them. So a lot riding on Drew Allar this year because the rest of the Penn State roster is really good. Brett, your thoughts on the game of the year of the Big Ten?
I think you could almost – I'm combining those 2 picks because those 2 games are synonymous. for what's going to happen at the end of the year. I mean, going from week 11 to week 12, I guess, with Penn State and Michigan, and then Michigan and Ohio State, those games obviously are going to decide the whole season. As Ed hit on, Drew Allar is going to be the key for Penn State this year. If he's the highest rated quarterback I think they've ever gotten, if I'm not mistaken. So obviously, like you said, very Trevor Lawrence-esque and the hype around him. I will say, just on terms of game of the year, not terms of college football playoff implications, Big Ten implications, I'm going to go ahead and just say if Ryan Day loses a third time in a row by more than 2 touchdowns to Michigan, he's not going to be fired. He's going to be politely asked to resign, and the next NFL head coaching job probably will be ready to roll by then. He will be heading to the NFL.
Yeah, I don't see him surviving a third loss to Michigan, and I
The
think
way
that's
that
really
it's been, if
yeah.
it's like a 3 overtime freak game, they could survive it. He might still not, but if it's another, they've gotten outscored 87-50 the last 2 years, and if that something like that happens again, it's not going to fly.
Yeah, and I mean we can talk about that game. I kind of agree with Dom. I have Michigan winning that game. I just think they match up really well with Ohio State. Ohio State will be, I think, still a very good team, but Michigan is just building an absolute tank. And there's just something about when those two teams have stepped on the field the last 2 times that Michigan's dominated the game. So I think playing at home for Michigan too will be really big in this one. I'm going to go with the Wolverines. I do think Penn State is a team that, James Franklin and Penn State have been falling short against Michigan and Ohio State the past few seasons. This is their best chance to get one of those teams. They get Michigan at home late in the year. We'll know a lot about Drew Allar. They'll have some time to mesh. Keandre Lambert-Smith is a really good wide receiver on the outside. If they can get, if the two of those can start to link up, this could be a really good Penn State offense to go with. But of course, is going to be a very good Penn State defense at home. So I think, between those 3 teams, you're going to have a lot of good games. So very exciting stuff. I'm going to go to the other side of the conference, and I'm going to go with the battle for Paul Bunyan's axe. You see, I got my Minnesota shirt on here in the stadium in the background. Wisconsin traveling to Minnesota. I think similar to Ohio State, Michigan, Minnesota has kind of flipped the script and owned this rivalry a bit. I think this could be a really big game for both teams' win totals. Right now, you have Wisconsin at 8.5, Minnesota at 7.5. I think both of these teams will come in needing one more game to hit the over on their win total. I have Minnesota winning it, similar to Michigan, Ohio State. They've seemed to match up really well, and I think they just have a bit more of an identity. I'm not exactly sure what Luke Fickell at Wisconsin is going to look like, and we'll get into the Badgers later, but I think Minnesota, Wisconsin could be a really big game in the Big Ten and maybe decide the Big Ten West at the end of the year. We'll talk about some other teams though, but that game very well could decide who's going to Indianapolis. Any other big games that you guys want to talk about?
Ohio State at Notre Dame week 3 is kind of cool. It's not a conference game, but who knows? Maybe it will be soon, but that's just a cool game worth highlighting.
Agreed. I highlighted that one as well.
Yeah, we've talked about every week. Seems like every conference, somebody's got a cool game. Obviously, we talked about Texas, Alabama this year a couple times. But, yeah, that one's a big one, too. That's a big game for Notre Dame as well, especially since they've solidified themselves. And since in our coverage, we could talk about them now because we'll have to talk about them at some point because we're not really covering them in a conference. So, but we'll probably touch on the ACC, I guess. But
I did specifically get a text from you a few weeks ago, Brett, that said, "Can we not talk about Notre Dame so much this year?"
Yeah, that's true. It was.
But yeah, I think that's a massive game for Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame. Maybe more than Ohio State. Like, that's a really big game for Notre Dame. They have a really tough schedule, and they can beat Ohio State. I think they put themselves in a bit of a driver's seat where they could still lose one game down the stretch and make the playoffs. So that'll be a really fun game. I think Ohio State might lose that one. That's how I'm thinking right now. Notre Dame is one of the best teams at home in the country. So I think I like the Irish in that one.
Ohio State's 7.5-point favorite in that game. You also have Penn State, Ohio State, October 21st. It's a pretty good one. Ohio State's -10 at home. They probably cover that, though, I think.
Ohio State
know.
just has this tendency to blow teams out. That's always scary to bet against them.
Mm-hmm.
I bet Ohio State really wishes they had Quinn Ewers still right now. Let's put it that way.
I bet they do. I think Cal McCord he'll put up numbies, but every Ohio State quarterback puts up numbies, and they still just haven't been able to get to the national championship aspirations that program has. All right. So let's move on to some dark horse teams that we think can maybe not surprise to win the conference, but might be a little bit better than what the experts think. Dom, who's your dark horse in the Big Ten?
It's less of even a dark horse, I'd say, and more of just like a team that I think everyone should watch because I think they're going to be just very entertaining. And that's going to be Maryland. You got the young Tagovailoa running quarterback. I think he looked pretty good last year. You got Roman Hemby at running back, solid receiving core. The O-line has been shaky, but if it holds up, the offense will be pretty explosive, hard to deal with. Their defense is pretty concerning. They have a lot of transfers coming in to fill some key spots. But I think you'll see a lot of high-scoring, fun games, entertaining games. It's hard for me to root for Maryland after Pinstripe Bowl against Virginia Tech. I was on vacation during winter break. I turned that off after the first quarter, I think. So, but I'm going to be excited to watch them this season. I think they'll have a lot of fun games. That's pretty much my only reasoning.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to be a really fun team. I hope Tagovailoa can stay healthy. That's kind of been his biggest issue at Maryland, is just staying healthy throughout a whole season. If he can stay healthy, the schedule sets up nicely for them. They could very easily be 5-0 heading into the horseshoe to play Ohio State. They have Towson, Charlotte, Virginia, road trip to Michigan State, and at home against Indiana to start the season. So could be a 5-0 start for the Terrapins. Who's next? Ed, you're next on the screen.
Yeah, I might try to go to that Maryland UVA game. That might be interesting. My dark horse team is kind of a system play here. It's Nebraska. I just think they're going to be, building in the right direction under Matt Rule. I think he's a really good coach. I know things in the NFL were, I guess, questionable, but in college, his track record's pretty proven. I think that was an awesome hire for Nebraska, and he's kind of done nothing but build programs in his career. And I think this will be a year where, it's a step in the right direction. They've done pretty well on the trail. And he's just, obviously his track record of success in college is pretty proven. So keep an eye on Nebraska to maybe upset some people and make life a little bit more difficult than they have been in recent years in that conference. So Nebraska will be my system play. Matt Rule, really good coach as a team that I'm keeping an eye on in the Big Ten. And then, I don't know if a top 10 team can be a dark horse to win the conference, but I do really like Penn State's chances to come out of this conference as the winner. I'm not super high on Ohio State. I think there's a chance that Ryan Day is on the hot seat at the end of this thing. And I always question Michigan. I know their roster is really good and their running backs are awesome. And of the three schools, J.J. McCarthy is the most proven quarterback. But again, those Michigan and Ohio State both seem to find a way to mess things up. And I think this year Penn State's good enough where it could fall in their lap if they do the right thing. So Nebraska is a fun team, but then Penn State is a legitimate chance to beat those other two big dogs.
That's a great point. I think Penn State, it is kind of tough to call them in the dark horse, but when they're the third best team in their division right now, they could very easily be in the national title game, and they're picked third in their division. So really interesting division. Brett?
Actually, you kind of faded this team a minute ago, but I actually really like Wisconsin as a surprise team, just because they have obviously a proven coach, and I think they got a massive upgraded quarterback with Tanner Mordecai from Graham Mertz. Why Florida named Graham Mertz starting quarterback, I don't know. Watching people like Wisconsin fans be so excited that he's at Florida and oh, it's good for you, man. We're so happy for you. It's just pretty comical to me. I don't like to talk bad about players or whatever, but it's just a massive upgrade from Graham Mertz. And I think they still have a pretty good team. They also got CJ Williams from USC, who's four-star borderline 5-star player that just sat behind Jordan Addison, and then obviously sat behind the guy that was there last year and this year that we talked about earlier. I can't remember his name now. So he wanted immediate playing time. Will Pauling from Cincinnati. They got two linemen from Cincinnati. nickelback from Cincinnati, and then Darian Varner, who was originally committed to Virginia Tech, is now at Wisconsin, is on the defensive line. I think this team, if there's a coach that I trust probably to kind of walk into the Big Ten, he coached Big Ten football essentially at Cincinnati, and that's why he dominated his mentality, played Big Ten football, was a good Big Ten football player. I think Fickell can really make this team do something special, like you said, not win, but they also have a really favorable schedule, avoid Michigan and Penn State. They play Ohio State. That's really the only crazy tough game they have. And from my eyes, at Illinois might be tough. Obviously, at Minnesota, that's always going to be tough. But, I mean, I will say there's a reason that they're at 8.5 already with a new coach. With their win total is mostly it's 8.5. I think they can get to 9 wins this year just because of their schedule, and I think they're massive upgrade quarterback. The only losses I see for sure on their schedule are Ohio State. That's really the only for sure one, but they'll probably lose one between Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, and then maybe probably one more. So I think 9's pretty fair for them, and I think they'll be the surprise team with a new coach.
Yeah, I think my only issue with Wisconsin is like how quickly can they switch system? How quickly can they go from the ground and pound team to the spread team? How quickly can they go from, disciplined, hard-nosed football to really what Cincinnati was doing was almost like a run and gun type football.
Yeah, that's true. But I think it was like run and gun, but it was kind of similar to almost like Ohio State, but it's still kind of it's up tempo, but they're still it's like more flashy Big Ten football. But Fickell still brings a Big Ten personality and a Big Ten mentality. It's not like throwing RIP, but not throwing like Mike Leach into the Big Ten.
Yeah. So let's talk about Wisconsin real quick. And the one thing about Cincinnati was they were vastly more talented than the teams they were playing.
Very true.
But one thing that brought them down to earth a bit was the penalties. So last year, Cincinnati was 118th in the country in penalty yards per game at over 64 yards of penalties per game. I believe they were last in the country in 2021. So Luke Fickell's teams the last couple seasons have had penalty issues. I am curious to see if that'll work and what will happen at Wisconsin, because if it's kind of a way that he disciplines the team and the way that they kind of coach in the offseason and practice and attention to detail, can Wisconsin survive having 60 yards of penalties a game? I don't know. Maybe they can. They are more talented than other teams, but we'll see. I think that'll be an interesting thing to watch at. Yeah. Two years in a row, Cincinnati was one of the most penalized teams in the country.
Were a lot of them offensive line false penalties?
Let's hope. I can get in. I can get you that information. Good question.
Just for personal reference.
Yeah. The Hokies, by the way, for people out there, hired Ron Crook, offensive line coach from Cincinnati. A great track record of offensive line play, but Cincinnati had penalty issues last year. My surprise team was honestly a surprise team from last year, and I think the surprising part will be that they're surprising again, and that's Illinois.
Yeah, that was going to be my other pick.
Illinois has a lot of good football players. Brett Bielema has done a great job building up that program, and one thing that's kind of surprised me when you kind of ran the numbers from last year, like Illinois was one of the best teams in the country last year. Like they weren't maybe top 5, top 10, but they were a top 20 team for the entire season. 2 first-round draft picks. They took Michigan to the brink. They played tough in every game. And another thing about Illinois is, according to ESPN's FPI, they have the second easiest schedule in the Big Ten this year. So they avoid Ohio State and they avoid Michigan. They get Penn State at home early in the season in week 3, and they end the season Indiana, Iowa, Northwestern. And if we're dealing with standings in those last few weeks, Iowa has to travel to Nebraska to play a night game. Minnesota and Wisconsin play each other. Illinois gets to play Northwestern. That could be a big deal. So I think Illinois is a team to look out for. They get a lot of good games at home. I can see them winning 9 games this year and really making an impact and making their first Big Ten title game. They're a pretty good team. I mean, they did all that with Tommy DeVito as their quarterback last year. So I think they'll be able to do something. They will take a step back defensively just because of, a natural regression. Use Witherspoon, the NFL cornerback. But I think their offense could stay about where they are, and they're well coached. And I think they just have an identity where, we have question marks at Purdue. We have question marks, obviously, at Northwestern. Nebraska has a new coach. Wisconsin has a new coach. Iowa can't score. So, in Illinois, looks like they have all the pieces together. They very well could have the best offensive line and the best defensive front seven in the Big Ten West.
So who's the quarterbacks, though? Ole Miss guy that backed up Dart last year. Altmaier, is that who it is?
Yep, Altmaier. Yeah. Luke Altmaier.
Yeah,
so they don't
great from DeVito.
Yeah, and you almost don't need him to be that good, right? You just kind of need him to be able to run the offense and not screw up. And that's what I like about this Illinois team is that they've built a brand where they're not ever going to be a national title contending team. They're probably never going to really beat Michigan, Ohio State, or Penn State, but they're going to be good enough to take care of business where they need to. So I didn't come into all of this research this summer liking Illinois that much, and kind of came out of it really liking Illinois.
Yeah, that running back's good. I forgot Love.
So, yep.
Reggie Love or Jordan. I almost said Jordan Love. Reggie, I think it's Reggie Love or something.
Not Jordan Love.
No.
Although there is a lot of Jordan Love talk on the streets these days.
Too much.
Too much, many would say. All right, so let's kind of flip the script here. Go to the biggest bust of the year. This is a team that will underachieve expectations by the most. Dom, who is going to be the most disappointed fan base in the Big Ten this year?
I've got 2 that I want to touch on. I'm sorry, Ed, but I don't think Nebraska is going to do too hot this year. And they're going to be my first bust team. I love them. I've got a few Cornhuskers in the family, but I think it's going to be a rough first year just simply because of Matt Rule. I never particularly liked him as a head coach. He did some good stuff at Baylor, but he's looked like a bit of a fool recently. I think Jeff Sims coming from Georgia Tech, he'll start, and that'll be exciting, but their schedule didn't make me very excited for their potential this year. I think they beat Colorado, Louisiana Tech, Northern Illinois, Purdue maybe, and then Northwestern, and that gets them to 5, and that'll make them under. So that's the first one. And then I think kind of just a team we know is going to be bad, but just touching on again, we know they're going to be bad. Indiana, they went 6-18 over the past 2 seasons after catching fire kind of from 2019 to 2020. They were 14-7. But it seems to have only gone downhill from there. They let up 34 points a game last year, and I don't see their defense getting any better. Their win total set at 5. I think they get 3 or 4.
Yeah, a lot of question marks with Nebraska this year, and I think
looks like Ed left because he didn't like that I was hating on Nebraska.
Ed's having some connection issues, but. Yeah, no. Jeff Sims is an interesting Nebraska quarterback. I think he's good enough.
He's not what you would expect.
He has so much potential, but he just can't hit open receivers.
Yeah, he's definitely not someone you expect to start in Nebraska, I'd say. But
no,
guess who's their top receiver coming in? Well, I wouldn't call him top receiver. Is a guy that we all know very well, Billy Kemp IV from University of Virginia.
Oh yeah, they do have him coming. And I think Nebraska's, if Matt Rule can kind of steady things, I have them going 6-6 this year. I think they'll be good, not great. They have an interesting schedule. So they open the season at Minnesota in this building back here. Hopefully it won't be covered in snow on a Thursday night. That's a really, really tough ask. And then they end the season at home on a Friday night against Iowa. Those are 2 really interesting bookends. And then they also travel to Colorado. We've talked about Deion Sanders in Colorado. That'll be an interesting game. One of the classic rivalries of the 90s. So it's really fun to watch that one. Great uniform matchup. That's going to look amazing at Folsom Field. But they get Northern Illinois. They get Louisiana Tech. But then they have a back-to-back Michigan, Illinois will be tough. But the schedule is not too terrible. They have some really tough games, but I could see them going 3-0 in the non-conference, and then it's just kind of about taking care of business some down the road. But it is tough because if you don't take care of business in the non-conference, or if you do get beat up really bad against Michigan, Illinois, that back half of the schedule after the bye week is pretty tough. There's a lot of rivalry games there, so it could be a tough one. And Jeff Sims, as we know from his days at Georgia Tech, he'll make a lot of great plays, but he'll probably make more bad plays than good plays. Brett,
I think he'll be running around a lot this year.
He'll be running around a whole lot, basically a running back there. Brett, who you got as your bust of the year?
I got a bust team and a team that is stuck with a coach probably for the foreseeable future, and they're not going to be happy with it. Is the Michigan State Spartans and Mel Tucker. I think they are in trouble. Losing their quarterback right 2 weeks before spring ball was not ideal for them. And they're going to be running with former Virginia Tech commit Noah Kim, who has played zero to little football at Michigan State University. The last few years he's been there. I think they're set at like 5 wins. I have them probably at 4, but I think the books have them set at 5. But I think if you talk to Michigan State fans, they're thinking they're going to win 7 or more games. I just don't see it. Play Washington, even though it's at home. Obviously, we've talked about them this year already. Going to be a really good team. I think they get the doors blown off them at home by Washington, and that's going to be a real big sign early. They play at Ohio State, play Michigan at home, play Penn State at home, play at Iowa. They also play Maryland. It's just a really tough schedule. They also have it's just not a lot of good vibes. They did pick up some decent recruits recently out of kind of nowhere, and people have gotten excited, but that's kind of, not really going to help you in the immediate future. I know they brought in a couple of defensive transfers. They brought in the guy from Texas A&M, Adelaide. That's a good player. But I think this team might win 4 games, and I think they're going to try to figure out how to get some money in the bank quickly if they can't figure it out. They won't cut him this year, but my point is if they wins 4 games, they're going to start raising that money now just in case he wins 4 games the next year.
$10 million a year.
Yeah, they're going to
$10 million a year for this guy. And their schedule, it's not only tough, it's the 8th toughest in the country.
Yeah, they have this is not good timing for them. And losing
it
your
is
quarterback.
Not good timing.
And
I think they have a really weird schedule because good news, their first 4 games are at home. Bad news, that means they have a stretch of at Purdue at home. They have a stretch of. They have 3 of their last 5 are on the road. They have a stretch where they go at Iowa, at Rutgers, home against Michigan, at Minnesota, Nebraska, at Ohio State. So going to be really tough for them. Again, you lose your quarterback, you lose your best receiver. You're not coming off of a good year. You have a really tough schedule. The vibes are not good at Michigan State. I think they could. I have them at 5-7. I think 4-8 is very likely. The over-under for them is set at 5.5, and I think that shows you what the public and what Vegas thinks about this team, and it's that they're not a very good team. I think getting to a bowl game would somewhat cool off the hot seat, but anything under 6 wins is I think Mel Tucker is in some trouble because it's not going to get any easier for them with Oregon, Washington, USC, and UCLA coming into this conference, and I think right now they are slowly slipping to just another punching bag team. I think they're still, because of the brand of the program and the players that they can bring in, they're going to be above Indiana and Rutgers and Purdue and Northwestern. But I think they're sinking down to the bottom of this conference really quickly. And 1 year with a few transfers is not going to be enough for these guys.
This sounds scarily familiar.
It does. It does, doesn't it? I mean, you kind of see it around college football too. If you if the only way you can build your team is with a few transfers, it's not going to go well. And unlike a lot of programs like Virginia Tech, I think you could go down. This is actually a lot more of like Texas A&M and Jimbo Fisher, where you have a big program with a lot of money. You spend it all on a coach. If things don't get done there, now you're kind of trapped. So Michigan State is in a really tough spot this year.
Yeah, tough to be a Spartan. Tough to be a Spartan right now.
Tough to be a Spartan right now. All right. Yeah, my biggest bust, Michigan State. I'm going to stick with him. Ed, who had the drop internet issues, he has Ohio State. What do you guys think of Ohio State? I have them going 10-2 with losses to Notre Dame and Michigan. What are y'all's thoughts on the Buckeyes?
Well, I think Marvin Harrison will be the best wide receiver in college football this year. That's one thing. Just to start.
Yep.
Oh,
Ed is back.
I'm back.
Back to explain his pick.
Back to
All right,
explain
yeah.
my take.
We just started talking about Ohio State.
Yeah, so I'm starting to really question Ryan Day. It's probably, somewhat ridiculous considering they are still a top 10 program at the end of every season. But they're just having obviously the hard times with Michigan. Jim Harbaugh is a really good coach, so it's no surprise there. But overall, I just am not super sold in the direction of that program where they're kind of really, really finesse. They'll hang 35 on you and really good quarterback play and obviously a great offense, but they just don't seem to have it. And whatever it is holding them back from being that national level team. And when you're preseason number 3 in the country, it's pretty easy to be a bust. Their bust season is a lot of historic seasons for most programs in the country, but from bust potential, I think they have the highest upside to not live up to the standards that they are held to, both nationally and internally in that program and that fan base. So I just think that there's a lot of bust potential there as the number 3 ranked team in the country in a conference that has a lot of really good teams, particularly some on the upswing, and a coaching staff that just doesn't seem to have that championship pedigree and that it factor to get them to where they need to go. So I just think there's a lot of potential there for bust. So I'm gonna put it on that because it seems likely to me.
Yeah, I would say anything other than a national title is a bust at Ohio State. It's just how the fan base thinks. That's how they've been conditioned, and they haven't really been able to get there under Ryan Day. They've won a lot of football games. They've put some incredible players in the NFL, but they just haven't been able to get over that hump. And I think that's a lot of thanks to Michigan and how good they've gotten. But yeah, there just seems to be something missing where they can't dominate like they probably should on a week in and week out basis.
Well, their defense has kind of struggled that's the biggest thing. Their defense the last few years has really struggled. Like the years when I'm thinking is like when Eli Apple, those years when surrounding him, those defenses were really good. And that's when they made the playoff and the national championship for a few years there. But ever since then, I forgot who was the DC then.
Was it our guy, Boston College coach?
Hafley?
Yeah, was it Hafley?
I think it was Hafley, which makes sense. But yeah, so that ever since that's kind of changed, that I think that's been their biggest problem.
Yep. Yeah, they will need to get better. They'll always be able to score points, but they do need to get a little bit more consistent on defense. All right, Big Ten champion. Now, we will talk about the college football playoff next week, but in terms of how the college football playoff has gone, if you win the Big Ten, you get into the 14 playoff. So, and this being the last year of the 14 playoff, but this is kind of not only a Big Ten champion, but who has a shot to win the national title is really what this is. Dom, who's your Big Ten champion? Well, give us your championship game and then your champion.
I think Michigan and Penn State in the championship, and I have Michigan. I think that Harbaugh's squad is loaded with talent on both sides of the ball, returning quarterback, running back combo, J.J. McCarthy, Blake Corum, both beasts. A couple of transfers at O-line to beef up the trenches, bringing back 7 starters on defense, players like Mason Graham and Junior Carlson. Their win totals at 10.5. I like them to win almost all the games. I mean, I don't think there's anyone even giving them problems on their schedule except for Penn State and Ohio State. No one else really, I think, competes. I think they win 11 or 12 games, win the conference, contend for the title. They'll have to figure out that whole suspension issue with Harbaugh. I think beginning of the season, they're trying to negotiate, I think, right now, but I don't think that's going to end up working out. I think that he won't coach the first 4 games, I think it was. They'll have an interim coach, but I don't think it's really going to matter because they have games like it's ECU, UNLV, Bowling Green, and Rutgers. So they don't really need Jim Harbaugh for that. So I think they roll on past those and then win the conference too.
And who wins the West?
I don't know. Come back to me.
All right, we'll come back to you. Ed, Big Ten title game and your champion.
Big Ten title game, Michigan and Nebraska. I'll throw that one back in there again because the West is not very good. And I could easily see any number of Nebraska, Illinois, maybe even Purdue if they somehow land on their feet after having a good year last year and then a lot of turnover. I could see any of those teams jumping up and beating Iowa or Wisconsin in the West. So the West is obviously really wide open, and the focus should be on the East. But I'm going to go with Michigan winning. I really like the boom potential of Penn State and Drew Allar, but until I see him play a little bit, I'm going to kind of temper my expectations there. I do think that they have, if Drew Allar is, as good as JJ McCarthy, which I don't think is a stretch by any means. I think Penn State could easily win the West and therefore win the conference. But until I see that, I'm going to go with the safer play, which is Michigan and JJ McCarthy and Blake Corum in that running back room. So Michigan wins the East, Michigan wins the title, and they go to the college football playoff and probably get trounced by Alabama or something like that.
So right now on FanDuel, Penn State is plus 600 to win the conference. Is that enough value for you to take it?
Yeah, probably. And you could probably even wait until after week 1 or after week 2. It probably won't move a whole lot. And you'll get to see Drew Allar play against, not a good Power 5 program, but you'll get to see him play against West Virginia and kind of see with your eyes what he might be made of. And if you think that that's something worth putting your money on, I don't think it'll move a whole lot week 2. If that's the case, yeah.
I think that ended perfectly. I think we just lost that. Brett, Big Ten title game and your champion.
For my Big Ten title game, I'm going to go with Michigan, and then I'm going gun to my head, Wisconsin. I think that it's going to come down to Wisconsin and Illinois for that side. Take the gun away from my head. I'm going to go 50-50 Wisconsin, Illinois, flip a coin. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. And I think Michigan, far and away the toughest and best team right now. I just believe that after what I saw the last 2 years transpire with Michigan, Ohio State, I think there's no reason to believe why they shouldn't win that side. I like what Ed's saying, seeing Drew Allar play a few games. I think Penn State, if they beat Michigan week 11, I think that they do win the division because I think Michigan will be rattled, and then I think Ohio State could sneak up and bite them and win that game, and it's going to come down to head-to-head matchup, obviously, or tiebreakers, whatever we call it, between Penn State and Ohio State. So I think it's going to be interesting, that West. This is probably the most competitive West in terms of national exposure from the Big Ten I can remember in recent memory. Usually it's 1 or 2 teams. Definitely 1, and then they usually lose a free game. Like Ohio State would lose to like an 8-4 Penn State team or something like that. It's going to be pretty crazy to watch. And obviously, as you alluded to earlier, all these new Pac-12 teams coming in. This is a very important year for all 3 of those teams to try to make a statement. But I still think Michigan is the best well-rounded team. I'm not completely sold on McCarthy, but I think the running back room makes up for it. So,
yeah, that's my thought process too. I think we're all on board with Michigan. I have them over 10.5 wins. I think that's now at 11 on most sports books. I have them winning the conference. only loss at Penn State. I do think Penn State gets one of these games at home, one of these big games, and they'll have time to get Drew Allar and everything together. So I do think Michigan wins the conference, though. Out of the West, I said it, I have Illinois. I just think they seem to have the identity. They have the offensive and defensive line. They have really good linebacker play, and they have an easy schedule. They have the easiest schedule out of all those, contending teams. And I just think it works out for them. Big game. I said Minnesota, Wisconsin. I still think that's a massive game that could decide the Big Ten West. I think Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin will all be pretty much within a game of each other. But Illinois hosts Wisconsin week 8. That's October 21st. So circle that one on your calendars. That could be a really, really big game in the third week of October. But yeah, I got Michigan winning this one. All right, let's go on to some of the. Go Dom. Dom, you have to clarify.
Yeah, I said Michigan and Penn State. I meant Michigan, Purdue. I think they're running it back this year. But Michigan's going to win either way, so that's all I really need to know.
God, I hope Purdue's not this good. We're going to be in trouble as Virginia Tech fans.
Hudson Card. He is a. Everyone gets
amped
up about a backup.
We're so excited about him. We can talk about Purdue right now, real quick. Why are people?
Yeah, let's talk about Purdue.
Why are people?
People excited about him?
Apparently. I don't. I mean, he was a good game manager in Texas. That's why they won 8 games last year. 8 games. With the talent.
I'm really curious to see if that offense takes a step back or not, because they have Graham Harrell coming in as offensive coordinator, and Graham Harrell has been not great. His teams have just had issues with him. He was at West Virginia last year, and West Virginia just they weren't consistent on offense at all. And he doesn't have the talent that he had at West Virginia last year. They lost a lot. I'm not high on Purdue. I think they could get better as the season goes along. I have Purdue at 6-6. They're over under set at 5.5. I think, they start out Fresno State, Virginia Tech, Syracuse, but after that, it gets really tough. They have a 4-week stretch of Wisconsin, Illinois, at Iowa, Ohio State.
Risky first 3 games, though. That's not like a.
No, that's tough.
Fresno's going to be pretty bad. They're not going to be the same Fresno team as the last few years, but
only 5-point favorites in that game, by the way. Hosting Fresno State week 1.
Purdue's got 3 night games this year. At Iowa, at Michigan, and at home against Illinois, all night games.
I just don't see it for Purdue this year. I don't. I think what will help them, though, the last 2 weeks they get Northwestern and Indiana. I think that could be their push for a bowl game. But I think they're going to really struggle in Big Ten play comparatively to last year. Any other thoughts on Purdue before we move on to some other teams we didn't talk about? Let's stick in the West. Let's go to Iowa. Will Iowa score more than 25 points a game this year? Yes.
You want free money? I get this. There's no way this bet hits this much this year. Last year, I picked Iowa under whatever team they played every game. 74% of the time, or 73% of the time it hit. It's insane.
Are you saying 25 points in one game or average throughout the season? Because I think both are valid questions.
I mean, they have Cade McNamara, quarterback transfer from Michigan, who, yes, he was the back. He ended up being the backup, but he is a very good quarterback.
Is he though?
He's better than he's better than Spencer Petras.
That's true. I haven't been sworn on a Michigan quarterback since Denard Robinson. So
that's true. Gosh, Brett's just bringing up nothing but bad memories for us today.
Yeah, I mean, but honestly, Michigan quarterbacks have always been since then.
I mean, their defense had one of the best turnover margins in the history of college football last year.
Yeah, it was crazy.
They've just done an incredible job of scoring points on defense, like vintage Beamer ball at Iowa. I'm not too high on them. I got 7-5, but I just don't think there's nothing to tell me that Iowa's a significantly better team than last year.
They do it.
Like they got.
Oh, go ahead.
They got all of that help on defense from last year, and they still couldn't win the division. So
they have 8 seniors on defense, and 7 of them are 5th-year or more seniors.
It's ridiculous. I don't know how they do it. They just keep the same players. We talked about Minnesota some. I think the Gophers, I think they're going to be a decent team. Their offensive and defensive lines aren't as good as they normally are, but they're going to be offensively a little bit better. I think they have, again, some interesting games. Thursday night opener against Nebraska. They'll travel to North Carolina to play that game. And then again, the battle for Paul Bunyan-Zax to end the year. I have them at 8-4. That barely cashes the over. Going to be a tough year. They have the second toughest schedule in the nation, according to ESPN FPI. Nebraska, we've talked about.
They have Mac Legend, Corey Crooms coming in, though. Dude had he had like 1,500 receiving yards or something like that.
They do. Northwestern, I have a 1-11.
Yeah, that's.
I have them beating Howard.
They almost pretty much gave themselves the death penalty on accident. Well, not on accident, but they went 1-11 last year, right?
Yeah, they did.
They're in a rebuild.
They beat Nebraska last year.
That game was nuts too.
The game was crazy in Dublin. But yeah, I have them. The only other game that I really thought about was UTEP. I think UTEP's just honestly a better football team. So the Miners are getting better. So watch out for UTEP. Purdue, we've talked about. Wisconsin, we've talked about. Indiana, they're just bad. There's just not a lot good going on. I think Tom Allen is.
Yeah, I'm about to say.
I don't know if he's fired mid-season, but I think after the season he's gone. They just need to do something.
They hit their peak when they hit 9 wins in 2019 or something.
It was the COVID year.
14-7.
They had Michael Penix.
No, he was bad though. COVID they didn't even play that many games, so I thought it was like they played like. No, you're right. They won like 6-2 or something. Mm-hmm. They played like 8. Yeah, Michael Penix. That's right. They beat Penn State on the goal line dive. That
where
was
he dove and barely touched the pylon. Yep.
Yeah.
Maryland. Thoughts on the Terrapins this year? Because this is a program that, I mean, if there were trophies for recruiting, they would just be racking them up. But unfortunately, there are no trophies for recruiting, and they struggle to really focus at football. I think there's just a lot of things that they care about more than football. So I have them 7-5. It could be a tough schedule. Easy non-conference, but the back half of that Big Ten schedule is tough.
Yeah, they're basically we talked about was it SEC, it was SEC basically. It's like if you could avoid Alabama, Georgia, and LSU, your chances of hitting your over were pretty good. But if you play all 3 of them or 2 out of the 3, your chances of hitting the over were significantly declined. And they play Penn State, Michigan State, and Ohio State.
I think a positive for them, though, their crossovers to the West Division are Illinois, Northwestern, and Nebraska. So Illinois, we talked about, is a good team, but Northwestern, Nebraska, I think if you were going to pull a couple of teams out of the West, those would be 2 that you would think about. So they have that going for them with Maryland. And then I think the last team that we really haven't touched on is Rutgers. Any thoughts on the Scarlet Knights?
I honestly don't know a ton about them other than that Virginia Tech's playing them.
Yeah, hope they lose against Tech.
Well, Greg
Schiano, and I don't know why.
He hired the offensive coordinator that he fired from Rutgers in 2010.
Yeah, that's what I'm about to say. He kind of reminds me, this is going to sound bad. He kind of reminds me of like the crazy dad that became the head coach because people got tired of dealing with him. He's like, I can do it myself. And then he brought all these, and he just can't do it.
He's like the T-ball coach that made his own T-ball league so he could coach his son's team.
Yes. Like exactly.
Yeah.
That's the vibes it gives off.
I think they're gonna. I mean, last year they were decent on defense, but really struggled offensively. And I think you're gonna see the same thing here. Like they're gonna be able to muck up the game a little bit, but once the ball gets rolling against them, they just don't have the talent to keep up. I think you're gonna see that this year. Like it's one of the reasons why I'm a little bit more confident with Virginia Tech's chances when they travel to Piscataway for that game, and it's one of the reasons that I think they're always going to struggle because they can't keep good recruits from New Jersey and New Jersey. And they're just at such a talent deficit to every team they play. So I have them going 4-8. They play a pretty easy non-conference schedule. They have Temple, Virginia Tech, and Wagner. Temple's bad. Wagner's bad. Truth be told, Virginia Tech's bad. So there is some hope, but that last 4 games that they have after the bye week, Ohio State, at Iowa, at Penn State, and Maryland, is a pretty murderous row of 4 games. So that's all I got for the Big Ten. It should be an interesting year. I'm high on Michigan. I think Michigan could potentially be a national title team this year. It might happen.
They were
I think they were. They tried. Here's the thing. I think Michigan is going to be a better team than what people think, and their over-unders at 10.5.
Yeah, it's just because that West is insane. They're all 3 of them are set at 10.5 for a reason.
Yeah.
What do we think about Big Ten as the national title winning conference at plus 290?
I think that's good value, honestly.
I think
What would I get?
Well, I mean, you have OSU alone at plus 750, Michigan alone at plus 800. And then I don't know what Penn State is, but they're in there too, I think.
Georgia exists, and that just
they do.
throws a whole wrench.
When was the last time? I just college football, while it is getting more and more, the parity is getting farther and farther, or less parity. I always get that wrong. The law of averages, I think college football is just too crazy, and kids are stupid. They can't handle it so much. I don't think they three-peat. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I think they could, but the law of averages, there hasn't been a three-peat in like decades.
Would you say it was plus 290?
Is the Big Ten to be the national championship winning conference? So someone from the conference to win the championship.
I think I would like the value of smaller units individually taking Michigan or Ohio State. I'm not sure the math on that, but actually, no, I think I'd rather just bet Michigan. I don't. Yeah. Yeah, that's tough. That's really tough. Yeah, I don't know if I love that to win the national title. I don't know if I love that. I would say one thing that I do like is to make the college football playoff. Ohio State plus 115. I don't like that at all. Michigan plus 125. Truth be told, I really don't like that one either. That's not a lot of value for a team to finish in the top 4. Penn State's at plus 460. And I think there is a world where Penn State could go 10-2 or 11-1 and still make the college football playoff, even if they don't win the Big Ten East. Like, I think there is a world where you have 2 teams from the Big Ten East go into the college football playoff. And, if Penn State is going to be in that discussion, it's going to be because they beat either Michigan or Ohio State. And there's not a lot of other opportunities for them to slip up. I have Penn State going 10-2 with losses at Illinois and at Ohio State. That could genuinely get you into the college football playoff.
There's only 3 teams preventing. There's only 3 teams in the country that are preventing 2 Big Ten teams and 2 SEC teams getting it. It's Clemson, Texas, and I just lost it. Clemson, Texas, and I just lost my third one.
USC.
Those are the only 3 teams preventing that from happening.
Yeah, I just
in my eyes.
yeah. I think Penn State plus 460 is a little bit more interesting of a bet.
I wonder if you could get over under 1.5 Big Ten teams in the college football playoff. Odds on that would be interesting. That'd be a nice prop for prize picks. Use code Locks of Sat.
We can't do teams on prize picks, but yeah, you can parlay. So let's do this exercise. Let's give Georgia, Michigan, Penn State, and then do we want to go USC, Texas, or Clemson / Florida State? Yeah.
Usually they won't let you parlay this, but let me know if
you can parlay 4 of them.
Really?
On FanDuel. Mm-hmm.
Throw in USC.
They're in USC. So a playoff of Georgia, Michigan, Penn State, USC is plus 6,315.
Oh. I don't hate that. I don't hate that at all.
I'm telling you.
It's worth a sprinkle.
I mean, it's possible. I mean, you'd basically just be switching what they've done with the SEC West and making that the Big Ten East.
Could happen. Could happen.
Could happen. It always could happen, Dom. That's the thing about sports betting.
You're telling me there's a chance. You're telling me there's a chance.
There is technically, it is within the rules of the game for that to happen. Yes, it is. All right. That'll do it for our Big Ten preview. Should be a fun conference. Again, use code Locks of Sat on Prize Picks, the best daily fantasy app out there and the only one with complete college sports coverage, including college football. We'll be back in not too long to talk the ACC. And then, fellas, we're playing real football games. Talking season will be over. That'll do it. Dom, sign us out.
Go Hokies.